how the United States military captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro in a covert operation and brought him to face charges in a Manhattan federal court. On January 5, 2026, the 63-year-old leader appeared before a judge alongside his 69-year-old wife, Celia Flores, both pleading not guilty to narco-terrorism and drug trafficking charges that could result in life in prison.
The judge asked, "Are you Nicolas Maduro Moros?" A defiant Maduro responded in Spanish, "I am the president of Venezuela. I consider myself a prisoner of war. I was captured at my home in Caracas." The judge cut him off. "There will be time and place to get into all of this." As for his plea, Maduro said, "I'm innocent. I'm not guilty. I am a decent man." Then the judge turned to Maduro's wife and asked for her plea. "Not guilty, completely innocent," she said.
After
What
court
unfolded over those 72 hours between January 3rd and January 5th represents one of the most controversial military operations in recent American history, raising fundamental questions about international law, sovereignty, and the limits of U.S. power. Let me take you through exactly what happened, who's involved, and why this case matters. To understand this story, we need to start with the indictment itself. Nicolas Maduro faces 4 federal charges, starting with narco-terrorism conspiracy, which carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 20 years and a maximum of life in prison. Cocaine importation conspiracy comes second, with a minimum of 10 years and a maximum of life. 2 weapons-related charges round out the indictment, involving possession of machine guns and destructive devices along with conspiracy to possess those same weapons, adding a 30-year minimum prison term. Celia Flores faces 3 charges: the cocaine importation conspiracy and both weapons-related counts. But here's the thing, these aren't new accusations. The original indictment was unsealed back on March 26, 2020, during Trump's first administration, right in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic outbreak in Venezuela. Prosecutors at the time named Maduro as the leader of what they called the Cartel de los Soles, or Cartel of the Suns, a reference to the sun insignia on Venezuelan military uniforms, and the indictment alleged he ran a massive drug trafficking network in coordination with Colombian guerrilla groups. The 2026 superseding indictment that's now moving through the courts adds both Maduro's wife and his son as defendants, and it no longer refers to the Cartel of the Suns as an organized criminal group, but instead describes it as a corrupt patronage system, which actually aligns more closely with how experts describe Venezuela's power structure. According to prosecutors, Venezuelan leaders spent more than 25 years abusing their positions of power to import tons of cocaine into the United States. The State Department put the number at somewhere between 200 and 250 tons of cocaine trafficked through Venezuela annually by 2020, which translates to roughly 400,000 to 500,000 pounds of cocaine every single year. The indictment details partnerships with Colombian terrorist groups like FARC and ELN, Mexican cartels including the Sinaloa cartel and the Zetas, and the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua. Between 2006 and 2008, prosecutors say Maduro sold Venezuelan diplomatic passports to drug traffickers, and between 2004 and 2015, he and Flores allegedly ordered kidnappings, beatings, and murders of people who owed drug money. Flores stands accused of accepting hundreds of thousands of dollars in bribes to broker a meeting between a drug trafficker and the head of Venezuela's National Anti-Drug Office, a man named Nestor Reverol Torres, and she allegedly received a portion of monthly bribe payments made to Torres as well. The bounty on Maduro's head started at $15 million when the original indictment dropped in 2020, later increased to $25 million, and then in August 2024, the US raised it again to $50 million. Now let's talk about how the United States actually captured him. Operation Absolute Resolve involved more than 150 aircraft from 20 different bases across the Western Hemisphere, including F-18s, F-22s, F-35 fighter jets, B-1 bombers, drones, and helicopters, with nearly 200 U.S. personnel on the ground in Caracas, ranging in age from 20 to 49 years old. Delta Force from the U.S. Army conducted the actual ground capture, while the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, known as the Night Stalkers, provided air transport, and the USS Iwo Jima served as a floating base where Maduro was later transported. But the planning for this operation began months earlier. A CIA team had been operating inside Venezuela starting as early as August 2025, providing what officials described as extraordinary insight into Maduro's movements, his habits, his eating patterns, even the location of his pets. A CIA source within the Venezuelan government tracked Maduro's location in real time, and U.S. forces trained for months using a replica of Maduro's compound to prepare for every possible scenario. The timeline on the night of the operation is remarkable. At 10:46 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on January 3rd, President Trump gave the final order to launch, and the weather, which had been a concern, broke just enough that Friday night to give the aviators a clear path forward. Around 2 a.m. local time in Caracas, explosions echoed throughout the city as the operation began, with helicopters flying at just 100 feet above the water to avoid detection. The U.S. had disabled Venezuela's air defense systems, and the lights in Caracas went dark due to what Trump later described as certain expertise from the United States, likely referring to cyber or electronic warfare capabilities. At 1:01 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, U.S. forces reached Maduro's compound at the Fuerte Tiuna military complex, Venezuela's largest military installation and where Maduro lived, and both he and Flores tried to reach a steel-reinforced safe room in the compound, but were captured before they could get through the door. The strike portion lasted less than 30 minutes. By 3:29 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, just 2.5 hours after the operation launched, U.S. forces were back over water with both Maduro and Flores in custody, and at 5:21 a.m. Venezuelan time, Trump announced the capture on Truth Social. Trump watched the entire operation in real time from a draped room at Mar-a-Lago, surrounded by military generals, and he later described the experience to reporters. If you would have seen what happened, I watched it literally like I was watching a television show. If you would have seen the speed, the violence, it was an amazing thing, amazing job that these people did. He posted a photo on Truth Social showing a blindfolded Maduro wearing noise-canceling headphones and a gray Nike sweatsuit holding a plastic water bottle aboard the USS Iwo Jima. Targets hit during the operation included the Fuerte Tiuna complex and sites across the Venezuelan states of Miranda, Aragua, and La Guaira, with satellite imagery later confirming that multiple buildings were destroyed and vehicles were reduced to rubble. One U.S. helicopter took a hit during the operation but remained operational, and Trump described bullets flying all over the place, calling the mission very dangerous. As the forces withdrew, multiple self-defense engagements took place, though according to Trump, only a few U.S. service members were injured, all of whom were reported to be in good shape, with no U.S. fatalities. On the Venezuelan and Cuban side, the casualties were far more severe. More than 80 people were killed according to Venezuelan and Cuban officials, with the Cuban government stating that 32 Cubans, including military and intelligence personnel, died in the operation. Anonymous sources cited by the New York Times said at least 40 Venezuelans died, while Venezuelan Vice President Delcy Rodriguez said innocent people died but gave no specific numbers. And the casualties included both civilians and military personnel. Around 6 p.m. Eastern Time on January 3rd, the plane carrying Maduro and Flores landed at Stewart Air National Guard Base in New York. 2 days later, on January 5, 2026, Nicolas Maduro and Celia Flores appeared at the Daniel Patrick Moynihan United States Courthouse in Manhattan. Judge Alvin Hellerstein presided, a veteran district judge who has overseen proceedings against other Venezuelan nationals accused of conspiring with Maduro since the 2020 indictment was unsealed, while U.S. Attorney Jay Clayton from the Southern District of New York handled the prosecution. Maduro arrived wearing an orange shirt with a blue shirt over it, beige pants, and orange slippers, transported to the courthouse via helicopter to the downtown Manhattan heliport, and accompanied by DEA agents. When Judge Hellerstein asked him to identify himself, Maduro stated clearly, "I am the president of Venezuela. I consider myself a prisoner of war. I was captured at my home in Caracas." He later proclaimed, "I am innocent." The judge repeatedly had to cut him off when he attempted to speak beyond answering direct questions, and at one point when the judge informed him of his legal rights, Maduro said he did not know of these rights. When asked how he pleaded, he said not guilty. Flores described herself as the First Lady of Venezuela and also pleaded not guilty. Both remain detained at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, with their next scheduled court date set for March the 17th, 2026. The legal team Maduro hired Barry Pollock as his attorney, and this choice is significant. Pollock is a partner at Harris St. Laurent and Wexler LLP in Washington, D.C., with more than 30 years of experience in high-profile criminal defense, serving as past president of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers and a fellow of the American College of Trial Lawyers. And he even teaches a course at Georgetown Law called Anatomy of a Federal Criminal Trial. But what really stands out is his client list. Most recently, Pollock represented Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks founder, negotiating the 2024 plea deal that led to Assange's immediate release after a 14-year legal battle. He represented Michael Krautz, an Enron executive, in one of only 2 Enron cases that resulted in an acquittal, helped overturn the wrongful conviction of Martin Tankleff, who spent 17 years in prison before being exonerated and receiving $13.4 million in compensation, represented Jeffrey Sterling, a former CIA officer convicted of espionage charges, and defended Prakazral Pra-Michel from the Fugees in a Malaysian financial scandal case. During the hearing, Pollock argued that Maduro is head of a sovereign state and entitled to the privilege from that status, stating there are questions about the legality of his military abduction and indicating he expects to file voluminous court documents challenging the arrest's legality. The strategy appears to focus on 2 main arguments: challenging the legality of what Pollock calls a military abduction and arguing sovereign immunity based on Maduro's claim that he's a head of state. There's an interesting wrinkle here. Because of U.S. sanctions on Maduro and the Venezuelan government, Pollock will likely need a waiver from the U.S. Treasury Department just to be paid for his legal services. Flores hired Mark Donnelly as her attorney, along with his law partner, Andres Sanchez, and Donnelly is a partner at Parker Sanchez and Donnelly in Houston, a boutique firm. He's a Spanish-speaking Houston native who worked as a prosecutor at the Harris County District Attorney's Office from 2001 to 2009, then at the U.S. Justice Department from 2009 to 2022, where he served as a senior advisor to the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Texas. The justification. So how does the Trump administration justify this operation? Trump called it one of the most stunning, effective, and powerful displays of American military might and competence in American history, saying he watched it like a television show and described the speed and violence as amazing. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated that Nicolas Maduro had multiple opportunities to avoid this, claiming Maduro was provided multiple very generous offers and chose instead to act like a wild man. Trump himself revealed that he'd had a private phone call with Maduro 1 week before the operation, telling him, "You got to surrender." And Trump said Maduro came close to surrendering during that conversation. Attorney General Pam Bondi announced the charges and described it as the execution of an existing criminal case, declaring that they will soon face the full wrath of American justice on American soil in American courts. The administration claims Trump has inherent constitutional authority to conduct the operation, with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth saying, "We have the absolute and complete authority, the defense of the American people alone." They've compared it to the 1990 U.S. invasion of Panama that captured Manuel Noriega, though that case had different circumstances. Maduro did not have an arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court, as the ICC has been investigating but has not issued a warrant, and the United States is not a party to the Rome Statute, meaning it doesn't recognize ICC jurisdiction anyway. Trump has been explicit about what happens next. He said, "We're going to run the country," referring to Venezuela, "until there's a safe, proper, and judicious transition." And he told NBC, "I consider myself in charge of Venezuela," while not ruling out boots on the ground. And he's been very clear about one of the motivations: oil. Venezuela holds 17% of the world's proven oil reserves, totaling 300 billion barrels. And Trump said it will take less than 18 months for oil companies to rebuild Venezuela's energy infrastructure, with Energy Secretary Chris Wright scheduled to meet with oil executives about drilling in Venezuela. Trump described the operation as very dangerous, and an attack that could have gone very, very badly, but General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, explained their preparation process. "We think we develop, we train, we rehearse, we debrief, We rehearse again and again, not to get it right, but to ensure that we cannot get it wrong. Delcy Rodriguez takes power. On the same day Maduro appeared in court, January 5th, something significant happened back in Venezuela. Delcy Rodriguez was formally sworn in as acting president before the National Assembly, with her brother Jorge Rodriguez, who is the president of the National Assembly and a psychiatrist, by training, administering the oath. Delcy Rodriguez is 56 years old, born in Caracas, and she studied law at Central University of Venezuela, labor law in Paris, and social sciences in London. Her father, Jorge Antonio Rodriguez, was a Marxist revolutionary and co-founder of the Socialist League who was arrested in 1976 for alleged involvement in the kidnapping of an American businessman named William Niehaus, and he died in police custody at age 34 when Delcy was young. Her political career is extensive. She served as Minister of Communication and Information from 2013 to 2014, then became Venezuela's first female foreign minister from 2014 to 2017, was president of the Constituent National Assembly in 2017, and has been vice president under Maduro from 2018 to 2026, while also serving as Minister of Economy, Finance, and Petroleum from 2020 to 2026. Maduro once described her as a tiger for defense of the regime, and one analyst, Imdat Owner, called her one of the most powerful and hardline figures in the entire system. Yet she's also credited with stabilizing Venezuela's economy and increasing oil production despite harsher sanctions, earning a reputation among Venezuelan and foreign business leaders as a technocrat. Rodriguez has been sanctioned by the European Union since 2018 with an asset freeze and travel ban for human rights violations, and she's also sanctioned by the United States, Canada, and Switzerland, while currently banned from entering Colombia. Initially, she condemned the capture as a barbarity and a kidnapping, but later she struck a more conciliatory tone, offering an agenda of cooperation with the U.S. At her swearing-in, she said, "I come with pain over the kidnapping of two heroes who are being held hostage," and she swore to work tirelessly to guarantee the peace, spiritual, economic, and social tranquility of our people. She's sought peace and peaceful coexistence and wants respectful international relations, while maintaining that Maduro is the only president. Trump has said she's cooperating, demanding total access to Venezuela's resources, and warning she could face consequences if she doesn't cooperate. And he's threatened a possible second military operation if cooperation stops. Here's an interesting detail. According to the Financial Times, Rodriguez's brother Jorge held secret talks with the U.S. government in 2025, and these talks included the possibility of having Delcy lead a post-Maduro transitional government. The original plan apparently involved Maduro going into exile, not being captured in a military operation. The Venezuelan context. To understand this fully, we need some context about Venezuela itself. Venezuela has been in economic crisis since the oil glut of the 2010s devastated its export-dependent economy. And despite having the world's largest proven oil reserves, 17% of the global total, the country has struggled under international sanctions and mismanagement. The political situation is complicated. Elections took place on July 28, 2024, which were widely denounced as fraudulent, with Maduro claiming victory, but the US and many other nations don't recognize him as the legitimate president. Many countries recognize Edmundo González Urrutia, a former ambassador, as the true winner, and he was the surrogate candidate for Maria Corina Machado, an opposition leader and Nobel Peace Prize winner who was barred from running. On January 10, 2025, Maduro began his third presidential term despite the controversy. Venezuela's modern political history really begins with Hugo Chavez, who transformed the country into a socialist state and founded the Chavismo movement. And when Chavez died in 2013, Maduro, who had been his vice president and close ally, took over first as interim president and then through contested elections, governing the country since 2013. Trump dismissed the idea of Machado taking over, saying she doesn't have the support within or the respect within the country. And John Bolton, the former U.S. National Security Advisor, said the Trump administration made a major mistake by not working with Machado and threw her under the bus. International reactions. The international response to this operation has been sharply divided. condemnations came swiftly. A UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres spokesperson called it a dangerous precedent, while China, Russia, Iran, Brazil, Cuba, and Mexico all condemned the operation. Iran called for Maduro's release and described it as an illegal act and nothing to be proud of. Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum said, "We categorically reject intervention in the internal affairs of other countries." The history of Latin America is clear and compelling. Intervention has never brought democracy. Colombia's President Gustavo Petro opposed the raid, and Trump responded by threatening him with potential military action, while multiple U.S. allies also condemned the raid. Even some U.S. senators expressed concern. Senator Mark Warner, a Democrat and vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, asked, "Does this mean any large country can indict the ruler of a smaller adjacent country and take that person out?" Senator Andy Kim from New Jersey said that Secretaries Rubio and Hegseth looked every senator in the eye and said this wasn't about regime change, adding that he didn't trust them then and now sees that they blatantly lied to Congress. On the other side, Israel and Ukraine expressed support. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis praised the operation, and the Venezuelan diaspora celebrated in multiple cities including Doral, Florida, Buenos Aires, Lima, Madrid, Quito, and Santiago, with hundreds gathering outside the Manhattan courthouse celebrating Maduro's detention. But there were also protests. In Times Square and other U.S. cities, demonstrators chanted, "Hands off Venezuela," and held signs saying U.S. out and no blood for oil. While in Caracas, protesters held Maduro portraits and pro-País UV banners. The legal questions. This operation raises profound questions about international law and sovereignty. Multiple international law experts say the raid violated the UN Charter and Venezuela's sovereignty, and while the U.S. claims inherent constitutional authority, no legal authority is immediately clear for the attack. The comparison to the 1989 Panama invasion and the capture of Manuel Noriega keeps coming up, but that case had different circumstances. The U.S. is not a member of the International Criminal Court and operates under a domestic indictment system, where once a defendant is physically before a U.S. court, domestic law establishes jurisdiction, and enforcement depends on custody, not international consent. But here's the thing. Maduro had no ICC arrest warrant. Unlike some other world leaders who face international warrants, this was purely a U.S. domestic indictment being enforced through military action in a foreign country. The questions being raised are fundamental. Does this action set a precedent for large countries to capture leaders of smaller nations based on domestic indictments? What is the legal basis for the U.S. to run another sovereign country? Can a foreign leader claim immunity from prosecution? These questions will be central to Barry Pollock's defense strategy, and he's signaling that he'll challenge every aspect of how Maduro was brought before the court. Conclusion. So where does this leave us? As of now, Nicolas Maduro and Celia Flores sit in the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, awaiting their next court date on March 17, 2026, while Delcy Rodriguez acts as president of Venezuela, walking a careful line between defending Maduro as the legitimate president and cooperating with the United States to avoid further military action. The Trump administration claims to be in charge of Venezuela and is making plans for oil companies to move in and rebuild the country's energy infrastructure. The charges against Maduro and Flores are serious. If convicted on the narco-terrorism charge alone, Maduro faces a mandatory minimum of 20 years and a maximum of life in prison. The cocaine importation charge carries a minimum of 10 years and a maximum of life, and the weapons charges add a 30-year minimum. These are not symbolic charges, as the U.S. government alleges a 25-year criminal conspiracy that trafficked between 200 and 250 tons of cocaine annually into the United States. But the bigger questions remain unanswered. The legal challenges that Barry Pollock will mount haven't even begun. The international community is deeply divided, and the situation in Venezuela itself is uncertain, with reports of gunfire over Caracas and drones being fired upon by police. What's clear is that this operation represents a significant expansion of how the United States is willing to enforce its domestic laws abroad. And whether that's seen as a bold strike against drug trafficking and authoritarian regimes, or a dangerous precedent that undermines international law and sovereignty, depends largely on where you stand. The 150-plus aircraft, the nearly 200 personnel on the ground, the months of CIA intelligence gathering, the replica compound for training, all of it led to those 30 minutes in the early morning hours of January 3rd, when Delta Force operators captured a sitting president and his wife from their home. Trump watched it like a television show. Maduro calls himself a prisoner of war. Delcy Rodriguez has been sworn in as acting president, and the next chapter of this story will be written in a Manhattan courtroom, where questions of sovereignty, immunity, and the reach of American power will be debated by some of the best legal minds in the country. For now, one of the longest-standing U.S. indictments of a foreign leader has finally made it to court. And what happens next will shape not just Venezuela's future, but how international law and state sovereignty are understood in the 21st century.